Chris was pointing out how new services contribute to the cost of rising cost of healthcare, and it's suggested that maybe we should put Congress in a pay-go box where Congress has to figure out how to pay for these new services. And I was suggesting that maybe Congress was constitutionally, not constitutional, was in the Constitution, but just institutionally unable to do that, and they might be better off putting the onus on CMS to come up with a way to pay for it.
So my thought on that is that in practice, it would probably amount to much the same thing. Because if you think about I don't know, 50 billion or 30, $50 billion Alzheimer's drug that comes onto the market, uh, CMS is just not going to be able to find the offsetting savings from within Medicare for that, or by adjusting the benefit, increasing cost sharing, cutting existing services. It's just I find it unlikely that it's going to be able to do that, and not just for that, but for a lot of these services, CMS is just not going to be able to find offsets. So I think ultimately it will need to find resources that are outside of the scope of the current Medicare program to pay for what is a really substantially escalating cost if this is permitted. Um, and so that means revenues from outside of Medicare, means premiums from outside of the existing benefit, and it means fiscal offsets potentially outside of Medicare. And I don't think CMS is going to be capable. It's going to be possible to give CMS that authority without giving CMS author authority way more of domestic policy than just healthcare. So I think ultimately, if you're looking for offsets, those really are so large that they need to be made from Medicare and probably from outside of Medicare, and probably should be made outside of Medicare. If it was just minor tinkering, if it was only maybe costs increasing by a couple of billion over 10 years, maybe CMS could find that from within Medicare. But because we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of increase, maybe even over 10 years, CMS is just not going to be able to find that within Medicare. And it ultimately is Congress's responsibility. If we were thinking about, say, an Alzheimer's drug as a new benefit, right? We like thirty billion dollars, right? Potentially a year. That's larger than the TANF program. It's twice the size of big prominent entitlement programs. Major, it's larger than very big categories of government spending by itself. It's something that Congress, if we were setting up a new entitlement outside of healthcare, Congress should absolutely have a say on these things because they're very, very large. And these numbers are so big that I think it ultimately is Congress's responsibility. Now, the question is Congress capable of exercising this responsibility? I am actually I think Congress is actually a much better institution. I mean, it's easy to kind of run against Congress, but I think Congress is a better institution than it gets credit for. It can do these things. It has agencies like MedPAC that advise it in a very sophisticated way. It does, if you look back over decades of healthcare payment policy reforms, it's actually done them in pretty sophisticated ways, in pretty nuanced ways. Obviously, it makes mistakes, and then these it kind of gets stuck in past mistakes in ways, but it is able to do trade-offs and quite reasonably if it's presented with a hard budget constraint. And it does actually make policy relatively deliberately. So I think if it's given the responsibility to find offsets, you will have horse trading that goes on. You will have the issue of like, how do you pay for this? But I actually do think that that's a process that can yield like a much better outcome than just kind of saying, well, let's just ignore the cost entirely, which is the current the current situation. And because the numbers are so big, I don't think that CMS has the ability to, or I don't think that Congress would want CMS, frankly, to find the savings from the existing Medicare benefit. And that's even the relatively conservative members of Congress. Because um, we're not just talking about you know, the big discretionary increases of benefits. We're talking about fairly small things I think CMS would really struggle to find offsets for.